Professor Celia Abolnik is 'n voëlgriepspesialis en 'n professor by die Universiteit van Pretoria se departement produksie dierestudies veeartsenykunde fakulteit. Ons gesels vanoggend oor hierdie heelwat aktuele kwessie. Good morning and thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Morning, Elsa and team.
What is the latest situation regarding the bird flu in South Africa?
So roughly 2 weeks ago, we detected the first outbreaks of influenza in South Africa on 2 farms. One was a broiler farm, one was a layer farm. And towards the end of last week, after almost a week of nothing, they detected another 2. So another 2 layer farms turned positive for H5N8.
Do you think we can expect to be more confronted with this kind of disease in future?
It's hard to say. This is part of an exceptional global event that we're experiencing now. So it's highly dependent on the seasons, and hopefully we'll be able to contain it in our flocks now. So it's hard to say, but we hope not.
How do you detect it? Do you see your chickens is a bit off? Yeah, but we got flu, and I can tell you, I don't feel well in my stomach, or what happens to the birds that a farmer gets in and he realizes. Or at factory farming, whatever, there's something wrong.
Yeah, this thing is so lethal that those chickens literally die within 3 days. One day they're looking a little bit lethargic, the next day they're dead, they're gone. It spreads very fast.
And there's not it's mostly bird flu that makes them die like that. There's not other illnesses that you can go like, okay, it seems a brain fout. Yeah. There's not a lot of different stuff.
No, this particular one is quite characteristic. It's killing them very quickly. But yes, there are some other poultry diseases that might cause similar symptoms. So veterinarians would always usually ask a laboratory just to confirm. For something like Newcastle disease, for example, causes similar symptoms. But this one is quite characteristic.
That's the word I was looking for, poultry diseases.
Yeah.
What causes bird flu?
Right, so bird flu is caused by an influenza virus. It's an influenza A virus. And we have 16 different types. And when we talk about H's and N's, what we're referring to are 2 proteins on the surface of the virus. So there's 16 different H's, and what we have here is an H5. So it's a viral infection of birds that is spread through the feces and through the oral secretions.
And can you please describe the symptoms to us?
Right, so the virus infects many different species and types of birds, but in chickens, the birds would appear lethargic, they would have droopy wings. The veterinarians are reporting red hocks, so the legs look a little bit red, swollen wattles and combs. But the most characteristic feature of this outbreak is that they just die very suddenly.
This bird flu, is it the same with ostriches? There's been a lot of problems in the Eastern Cape because of the ostriches, and a lot of guys actually closed down. Is it the same virus?
That's true. It's not the same virus.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's totally different viruses.
So what happens is that there's 2 forms of the disease. There's a low pathogenic form and a highly pathogenic form. Ducks and wild birds carry the low pathogenic form. It's part of their natural flora. What happens in the case of the ostriches is because the ostriches are farmed outdoors, they have contact with a lot of wild ducks, and there's a seasonal introduction of these viruses. And what happens is that the virus can mutate from a low pathogenic form to a high pathogenic form in the ostriches. And that's what's caused the outbreaks in 2004, 2006, and 2011. In this case now, what's happened is maybe 20 years ago in East Asia, because of the way that the Chinese and the Vietnamese farm with poultry, with chickens and ducks together, there was a mutation event. It got into wild birds, and this now migrated north. It got into Europe. So this is ducks and migratory wild birds that are carrying the highly pathogenic form, and that's what makes this so unusual, and this is what's reached us now. So it's not the same as what's been causing problems in the ostriches. This is something that's come from the northern hemisphere to us.
Okay.
Are there any other birds that can be exposed to the avian influenza?
Other birds, for example?
In terms of what we've just mentioned, I mean, is it only ostriches and chickens and ducks, for instance?
You have to consider how the virus is spread. So it's spread in the feces. So if your backyard poultry or your exotic birds in their aviaries are exposed to fecal matter from ducks, yes, it can infect those birds.
But that's what they say, it's water birds.
Yes.
So what is a water bird? Is that ducks or like a flamingo? Is that a water bird? I know it sounds really
stupid. A flamingo is a water bird,
yes.
but ducks, waders, even ibises, not hadida ibises.
Okay, I know, yeah. They grass birds.
Yes, exactly.
No, they're irritating birds.
Yeah, but when we speak of water birds, it's usually things like waders, the little snipes and the terns,
Okay.
seagulls, and then our regular ducks that we have.
How is the spread of the disease curbed?
Quarantine, and biosecurity. It's extremely contagious. So the best way is to maintain a clean environment. The virus is extremely susceptible to disinfectants that kill viruses and things like bleach and sunlight and all of that. So just keeping equipment clean and clothing clean will usually keep it out of your flocks. But that said, even the best poultry producing countries in the world, in Europe and America, haven't managed to keep this out.
And you've just mentioned quarantine. How exactly does that process work?
So as soon as the disease is confirmed by laboratory diagnosis on the farm, the Department of Agriculture will institute quarantine, which means that no birds are allowed off the farm, and the movement of people and vehicles and equipment is stopped immediately. And then they start a process of forward and backward tracing. They try and see where have birds and people and equipment moved to, where have things been received onto the farm. And then in a 10-kilometer radius around that, there will be increased surveillance. So they'll start looking at any other poultry producers in the area and start monitoring them intensively to ensure that they are not infected too.
And what is the influence of bird flu on our economy?
Obviously, the guys that have this are very badly affected because in South Africa, we don't vaccinate, we stamp out. That means that all the birds have to be killed and killed as quickly as possible, and they have to be disposed of. So that's already huge financial losses for the farmers. There is some compensation that's paid, but it's not adequate. And then obviously, if this becomes more widespread, it's going to affect us quite severely. We're going to have to import a lot more poultry because we won't be able to produce the amount of poultry that we need for our own consumption.
So if I understand it correctly, it started in Zim. That was the first getting close to us. Can you kind of blame Zim not controlling it and then it came to us? Or is it you can't control that bird just skipping Zim and landing in Mpumalanga?
Oh, we would love to blame Zim.
Yeah, we would love to blame Zim.
But we can't.
You gave us bird flu.
Right. So let me take it a step back. Bird flu seems to end up from time to time, highly pathogenic bird flu ends up from time to time in West Africa because they have migratory birds that move between Europe and West Africa, ducks, for example. When this popped up in January in Uganda, that's when we started taking note because there's two main flyways for birds. Now, bird flu is usually spread by migratory birds. There's one main flyway that comes down the west coast of Africa, and there's one that comes down the Rift Valley. And with all the H5N1s that we've had over the years, we've worried that it might end up here, and it didn't. Now, this thing pops up in Uganda in January, and that's when we really became alarmed because that's the East African flyway. It comes down the Rift Valley.
Okay.
In May, it got to the DRC, and the DRC reported that it was in both wild birds and backyard chickens. And that was another red flag because once it's in chickens in Africa, there's not much we can do to stop it. And then, of course, we had Zimbabwe in June. So we're not actually sure how it got to Zimbabwe. We're not sure whether it was ducks, and we're not sure whether it was movement of infected poultry. And likewise, we're not sure whether it moved from Zimbabwe to us with ducks or with poultry. So we haven't found any ducks that have the virus in yet, and it's of course not the migratory season for ducks at the moment. So it would be nice to blame Zimbabwe, but
yes, but
unfortunately they don't know how they got it, and we don't know how we got it.
Sure, that's interesting.
Ons gaan voort met vanoggend se gesprek oor voëlgriep met professor Celia Abolnik van die Universiteit van Pretoria se fakulteit veeartsenykunde. Are we right when we say that this virus is not dangerous to people? It cannot spread to them?
Yes. Usually people contract this when they handle infected poultry, and the thousands and thousands of people in China and Europe who've been in contact with this virus have not contracted it. So yes, it's not a human pathogen as far as we're aware.
And as we discussed earlier, it is very dangerous for the economy. I've read an interesting article yesterday stating that up to 2,500 people can still lose their jobs or be retrenched because of this situation. Which countries are prone to be affected by bird flu?
Wow. Well, now we know that we and our neighbours are prone to be infected with bird flu. Any countries that are on the migration routes are susceptible. Europe, it's all over Europe. It's across Russia. America had it 2 years back. So the only countries the continents that haven't had it yet are South America, Australia, and Antarctica.
That's only a few.
Yeah. The ice chicken.
Baie mooi, Jorna.
Okay.
Is there anything that the man on street can do to influence these outbreaks?
I think people must just be vigilant. I think if you notice something, if someone's chickens died all of a sudden in their backyard overnight, or if you happen to be out and about and there's a lot of wild birds dying at a dam, call the state veterinarian. It's their job to go and do a proper investigation and get samples to a laboratory.
Am I right to say this is like the last thing that the poultry industry needed? Because we know with the imports there's been so much trouble and a lot of people have been laid off anyway, job creation. Do they need a breather, you think?
Oh, absolutely. First it was the maize prices, then it was the dumping, and yes. now it's this. So yeah, shame those poor guys. I feel so bad for them.
I love it that people know all this about chickens. No, seriously, I love specialities.
But we don't know what's going to happen to the affected chickens. I mean, according to reports, they don't know what they are going to do with them yet.
Right, so what the farmers are doing at the moment is when they've killed all of them, they're composting them in the house, because that whole process of composting, the heat it generates and the decomposition inactivates the virus. The question is, what do you do with all those rotten chickens eventually?
Burn them. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think this has been a very interesting discussion, so thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
I definitely, and I think Jorna as well, feel more informed.
Thanks.
Dit was dan professor Celia Abolnik van die Universiteit van Pretoria se fakulteit veeartsenykunde.